Welcome to Business Class. I'm Steve Ekstrom from Learn Tourism, a nonprofit academy dedicated to advancing the tourism industry through innovative training and sustainable practices. Our mission? To empower travel professionals and communities with the knowledge they need to create meaningful, authentic, and sustainable tourism experiences. Ready to join us on this journey? Visit learntourism.org and start making a difference today. Hey, Chris, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm living the dream.
Where are you?
I am in Amish country, Indiana.
Oh,
So
okay.
there's the sound of a horse galloping past me as I speak. I pick up my 13-year-old niece tomorrow, and
Very
then
good.
she joins me in the RV for another 5 weeks of a road trip.
Where are you going specifically because she's with you?
Yes, we'll be doing more activities and attractions and all that stuff than I typically do. We'll be doing northern Indiana. We'll get up into Michigan, up around Kalamazoo, probably over to Detroit, check out the Henry Ford, then come back through South Bend and to Chicago just in time.
So very Midwestern focused.
This time, yes. We've done Tennessee and the Smokies. I don't even remember, but she's at that age where visiting New York would be really cool. I'm delighted that we're talking finally. You and I had been running in the same circles for quite a while, but we never really had a chance to talk, and I never really got to know more about you and what you did. That's why I'm glad that we're getting to chat today.
Also give you a little bit of background on how DIY came to be. It might be helpful to know the origin story there. My career background was in consumer packaged goods marketing. I worked for a packaged apparel company, then worked for a food company in classic product marketing, and then got the chance to, and my last stop in that was in Nashville, got the chance to move to Western North Carolina in Asheville 30 years ago. I'd love to say I started at 9, but I can't say that. And came to work at Biltmore, was in marketing for them in almost 10 years, about 9.5 years before, and was vice president of marketing when I left. And decided to do something a little bit different. It was not that I'd run out of challenges. At the time, it was just the same challenge over and over again with no additional tools, and decided to leave and become a consultant. Figured if it doesn't work out, doesn't pay the bills, I've got plenty of time in my career to do something else. I initially started out thinking that there would be certain areas I would really focus upon, areas that were specific to brand management and so forth. Within about a month, I got a call from a client saying, "Hey, we need somebody to help us hire an ad agency. I'm sure you've done that in your career a few times. Can you help us?" I said, "Sure." That was the beginning of saying yes to a lot of things that I hadn't thought about, which I enjoyed, some of which I learned I should never do again. I'm still learning that. I also decided that I liked variety of taking on different things, almost all of which were in the tourism and hospitality sector. And I became jack of all trades, master of none in a way. But slowly over time, there's certain things I became interested in being more of a true expert in. There's a reason my LinkedIn profile says I'm a Swiss Army knife of different marketing and planning skills. I'm starting to dial back a little bit on that because I finally realized I want to be, when I do retire, whenever that is, I want to retire happy. I want to retire fulfilled. I want to feel like the things I'm working on are things I'm working on because I like the people, I like the projects, and oftentimes the places as well. Most of my work is centered around strategic planning, market research, and high level marketing, usually at the intersection of all three, or at least two of those. So that's broadly what I've enjoyed doing and where a lot of my career has taken me. But I've also done some really weird stuff too. For lack of a better term, I call it weird stuff, to be honest.
I get it.
So,
I was the director of sales and marketing for Ripley's Believe It or Not for a
oh,
period.
no kidding.
So I know weird stuff.
A lot of the quote unquote weird stuff that I have done is really difficult to explain in an elevator speech. but it's usually been with people I know or who know me really well, or that I've done something else with them that's more traditional, like a strategic plan project or a high level marketing plan, something really obscure. And I'll write that into my LinkedIn profile. I can't do that. But I finally realized that most of the people that ask me to do the more obscure stuff are the people that have hired me to do the traditional stuff. And so the traditional stuff is what goes on the website. I end up enjoying working with those folks and they enjoy working with me and ask, hey, I need someone to do this. Could you do that for us?
Fills in the gaps and it lets you keep learning.
Yeah, it does. I'm a naturally inquisitive person. I was at a meeting last year and there was an icebreaker exercise. You were asked to give 3 words that describe who you are. And the first word I said was curious. That's got me in trouble sometimes. It gets me in trouble with my own family sometimes, but it really does describe me well. I'll ask a lot of questions. I just came back from a prospective client meeting and I described my approach. Fortunately, this was somebody who is a little older than me, so he knew what I was getting at. I described my approach as the Lieutenant Columbo approach to planning. I ask a lot of questions and try to dig deep. And that's a little bit about me and my background. Currently, I am the only full-time employee here. I do a lot of partnerships, though. I had another employee till recently. I'd say a good 50% or more of my projects are in partnership with some firm or resource.
If you weren't living in the Asheville area, where would you be?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. I'd either be in the Rockies somewhere or I would be back in Nashville. My wife and I love living in Nashville and thought we'd never leave. It was about 2 hours from where she grew up. It's a far different place now than it was when we were living there. I'd probably be in Nashville or someplace in the Rockies.
I love the Rockies. I was just out there last year.
My wife and I went out there and we had never been to that southwestern quadrant of Colorado. We flew into Colorado Springs, spent some time there, drove to Durango, Telluride, and Aspen. We absolutely fell in love with it. I'd been to other areas in the Rockies before, but never that area specifically.
I'll tell you a funny story. I was in Durango meeting with the staff. I've worked with them for a while now. And they said, what's the most interesting thing you've seen in your travels as a nomad? I saw somebody prop themselves up onto a trash can on a city corner and take a shit at 8 o'clock in the morning. Oh my goodness, where would that be? At least the guy went in the trash can, didn't leave a mess on the sidewalk. Still, they were mortified. I told them the story, and then when was this or where was this? I'll tell them. It was funny.
What's funny about that is my wife and I had really only planned on Durango as a stopover, and we actually ended up really liking Durango a lot more than we thought we would.
It's a cool city.
But we really fell in love with Telluride. We couldn't afford to live there, but we really fell in love with Telluride.
I ended up in the southeastern corner of the state last trip. I was in some town. It had a coffee shop, post office, everything in town in one place. It was cute. It was interesting. And it was so pretty. The mountains were off in the background.
Yeah,
I think next year I'm going to try to take my niece to the national parks of the West,
yeah.
to Yosemite, Yellowstone, maybe Joshua Tree.
Joshua Tree is on my bucket list. I've not been there. We did go to the 3 national parks last year in that southwestern part of Colorado and loved that. We had a great time. Next week, I am taking my parents, who are 86 and 85 years old, in very good physical shape and excellent health. They live in Raleigh, and I'm taking them along with my brother-in-law and my niece, who's 16. My younger sister passed away about 6 months ago unexpectedly. It's a good chance that we're going to take them. We're going to fly to Jackson Hole and go see the Tetons and Yellowstone. I've been there a couple of times, but my parents never have, and they've always wanted to do that. And thought it was a good chance for some bonding. And so we're going to do that next week.
Are you renting a house or doing an RV?
We're going to rent a house. Yeah. Thought it was a good idea for my parents at that age and for my niece, who's 16, to have a
Yeah.
little bit of space. So
How long are you going to be there?
just around a week. That's about the extent of what my parents will be able to do.
A good little side trip while you're up there. Let me see how far away it is. I stayed at a dairy farm. About an hour and a half south of Jackson Hole. You drive through the Bridger Teton National Forest. and end up in this little town called Afton, Wyoming. Now, Afton, Wyoming, you pass underneath the world's largest antler arch
Oh, wow.
on your way there. There's a family, the Shumway family. They have their own dairy farm and their own creamery on
Wow.
site. Now, it's not like, oh, there are cows way out in the field. No, the cows are coming up to you in the parking lot. And the cows are right there. And it's just such a charming stop. Jody and his family, multi-generational farmers, preserving the land, sustainability, and some of the best ice cream I've ever had. They
Wow.
also have a stock of meat, so you can purchase some steaks from them that are completely grass-fed and probably some of the best cuts you'll find. It's worth the hour and a half, hour 45 to get down there and back just as a side trip. And it's the opposite direction of where most people are going. Most people go from Jackson Hole north up into Yellowstone. But you'll do that one day and stop by the old barn, take pictures by the old house.
2 years ago, it was the middle of February. I had a work assignment out that way. I was serving as a resource with this partner. We flew into Jackson and drove basically east of Jackson over to Lander, Riverton, and Thermopolis. It was bright sunshine when we flew in, but we had to drive back in the darkness and it was snowing like crazy. That was a really cool experience. That range country with mountains and valleys. I really enjoyed that driving that. It truly is dude ranch country.
The bison ranch out in that area. And
Mm.
it's owned by this couple. He's a dentist and he still works. So she runs the bison ranch. And you show up and she's like, we'll take out the hay ride and you can go around the pasture. So we take a walk down into the pasture and there's this full grown male bison that comes up to the gate. And she tells us, don't worry, he was bottle fed. So he's really friendly. So he comes up to the gate and you can scratch him. And they actually walk him through town for the town parades and stuff like that. And then we went out into the open range where the mom was having babies. And there were two babies that were born that particular day. I'll get the name of the place and send it to you. Triple P Bison. So as we're there, I'm seeing these babies skip around on the field. They're hours old. And I said, do you mind if I get out of the side by side and just take a picture with me? And these things, they're bison, they're huge. Like they're hundreds of yards away in the background. Yeah, no problem. So as I turn to step out of the side by side, I feel this heavy fog hit me in the side of the face. One of the bison had come up from the other side of us and had walked up to the side by side expecting a treat. It was inches from my face. As a traveler, should have known better. Like, this is how it's gonna go. But yeah, those are two experiences out in that general area. Pretty cool. How did you end up getting involved with Justin and
So
Sarah?
I had known Justin for a few years. He had served as a digital marketing resource for a couple of my clients. I met Sarah through Justin and realized that at the time he had these two different parts of his business. And it was probably about 9 or 10 years ago. I had walked into a client's office and was meeting their marketing person. And she had not come from a tourism background, hadn't really come from a marketing background. And this is a client in Kentucky, decent sized municipality, not completely backwoods, suburb, either Lexington or Louisville. I walked in to meet her. The executive director was retiring and she was the heir apparent, nice woman. And I said, oh, we sat down at the table. I said, can you tell me what your marketing plan is? I'd like to take a look at that. She says, sure. But she goes back to her office and comes back with a stack of magazines and newspapers. And it was at that moment, 9 or 10 years ago, it dawned on me that she only knew what she knew and hadn't come from a marketing background, was getting ready to do Southeast Tourism Society's marketing college, but had not done that yet. I realized that for many of those with more modest resources who didn't hire an agency, didn't hire a digital marketing firm, that they only knew what they knew. And oftentimes they invested in whoever rep came to see them in their office or
Whoever
whoever
sold them
just
something.
happened to be just showing at the state tourism conference that year. That was when I went to Justin and said, I think there's a real opportunity out there for tourism marketing professionals who have not received any formal training and aren't yet at the point where they can hire an agency to teach them the basics of digital marketing. Stephen, you know this better than I do. So few people in this category, their career journey oftentimes has a lot of different twists and turns. Now, that's changing somewhat, but a lot of people, particularly in smaller and medium sized organizations, did something else entirely before they started doing what they do. And now they've got this budget and they've got to start investing those dollars. And so I told Justin, I think there's a real opportunity for you and the educational component of what you do for the Institute to start a program like this. Our first program was relatively lightly attended. My goal was always to have it be for people who didn't always feel comfortable in the digital world and who could do more networking and note comparing with their peers at 800-person conference, a state tourism conference. And so that was what we set out to do. Now, after a couple of years, I told Justin and gave him full ownership of the event. I said, you've got the staff, you've got the resources, go run with this, and relinquished all rights to it. And that was always the hope that we get people who come back year after year. We get some new people. And I think the trick has always been one, growing it, and two, how do you appeal to people who want to come back every year, but the people who are new who want that basic grounding in things like digital marketing and other forms of marketing that they're not able to get anywhere else.
Yeah, I get that. To your point about folks coming to this industry from a variety of different ways, I've interviewed 300 CEOs. I think it's closer to 300 now. Two of them even knew what a DMO was when they were graduating college. Everybody else has had some sort of serpentine, skill focused route to the jobs they're in. I think the same is true for most of us in this industry. What I find folks have in common is that curiosity you talked about, that love for learning that comes naturally to this industry, and that passion comes naturally to this industry because that's what travelers love. You travel so you can learn something new, see something new, try something different. I realized later in life was actually my passion. It wasn't just the food, the architecture, the art, the music, the culture, the scenery, which I love. It was the fact that I was learning
Yeah.
everywhere I went and with everything that I did. And in my backstory, I did tourism product development and bringing it to market for years. Half of that working on site, on property, the other half consulting with mostly destinations. Heavy focus on travel trade. About 10 years ago, my sister, who's the instructional designer and educator by trade, asked if she could come with me to a trade show. We walked out of the first workshop and she looks at me and she goes, "Are they all this bad?" I'm like, just wait. Just wait until you're subjected to a webinar and you want nothing more than to slit your wrists. That really got me thinking. I'm the kind of person that likes to take things apart and figure out how they work and find a way to build something better from it, build something more useful. So I set about learning as much as I could about adult learning, education, teaching theory, psychology of learning, organizations, and technologies. And COVID struck and my destination work evaporated overnight. This back burner idea that we've been testing, we've been beta testing the technologies of different business models and teaching theory. And I'm like, oh, you know what? It's time. This is interesting. And that's how we came to be. We deliberately set up as a 501c3 nonprofit because folks learn from people who are willing to teach. And a lot of times, the person who's willing to teach is the person who's also there to sell. Before we dive back in, a quick word from our sponsor, Learn Tourism, the nonprofit academy, where we're dedicated to transforming the tourism industry with 4 key services: our cutting edge learning experience platform, which offers robust analytics and seamless updates, our custom course development, which ensures tailored learning solutions, subject matter experts who provide deep insights and valuable knowledge, and of course, our engaging speakers who are here to inspire and educate with impactful presentations. Discover how we can elevate your tourism education at learntourism.org.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. I think there's been increasingly cynical attitudes about that. People are a lot less able to be conned than they may have been in the past. People know better now when they're being sold and they're not. I would agree with that. I
And
think,
and 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 I wanted to make sure we figured out really three criteria that we would focus in on that would set us aside and we think would make education in this industry better. It was one, transformations, giving people practical skill. What can you do? Not what do you know? The second is engagement. People have to be active participants in their learning experience. And the third is accessibility.
yeah,
And accessibility being two parts. One, different learning styles. You can't just throw a slideshow up and expect it to work, or run a 40-minute video. And like you can't. People have to learn in their own way. And the other form of accessibility was presenting it when and where people are available. This goes to the governor's conference. They stand up on stage
yeah,
and talk about how many hundreds of thousands of people in this state work in the tourism sector
yeah.
to a room of 175 people. Wouldn't you rather reach all of them? Those were the three things that we focused on. When I got to meet Justin, we started talking. I learned more about the approach that Sarah had put together and the style of training and education that was there. We just clicked.
I,
One thing led to another, and here we are. It was almost serendipitous. We have all sorts of service and product. The interesting place that we're at now is teaching folks that good education is worth paying for. Because so many people were giving away bad education. The State Tourism Association, we have 30 bids from our partners who are willing to, good for you. I'm like, if I'm there to teach, you're paying me as a teacher. If I'm there to pitch my product, I'm there as a marketer and I'll pay you. But I'm not there to do that.
what's also interesting is that I have done for the last 10 plus years, occasionally we'll go speak at one of the two universities in Western North Carolina
Yep.
that have hospitality and tourism programs. These aren't UNLVs of the world or the University of Houston's or even Cornell. Two things that always stood out to me. One, that even some of the curriculum taught in those programs is not terribly relevant to what is happening in the real world. And I know that sounds like an old man get off my lawn type of talk. The second thing that is interesting to me is going back to the nonlinear path. Oftentimes, there's a lot of juniors and seniors in these classes, and you ask them, what are you planning on doing? Half of them want to be wedding planners, and the other half want to work in the private sector. Very few people come out of those programs wanting to work in the DMO sector, just as an example. And again, it helps explain why oftentimes, particularly on the DMO side, people take these very curvaceous and nonlinear pathways to get onto the DMO side. Quite frankly, that's where a lot of the opportunity is because we've done nothing to teach leadership skills, people management skills, things like digital marketing. I'm on the board of advisors of one of those schools now, and we had a meeting about a month ago and was asked by the faculty and the leadership of the program, what are some of the things we ought to be teaching? We're getting ready to do this curriculum review. I said, management of people. You're only as good as your last boss. If your last boss was a complete ass, there's a good chance you're going to be the same way because that's the only thing you know, particularly for young people. I'm amazed at the gaps in learning that still exist out there that very few people actually acknowledge as gaps.
I wrote an article about career paths in tourism, and it did follow a linear path, but it was a linear skill path.
Yeah.
So it talked about these are the skills that you develop at that first job. These are where you can take that to your second job and your third job and your fourth job, your fifth job. And when explaining it that way, it's much easier for people to conceptualize getting from here to there in an industry because you're going to work at the front desk on a night audit. How do you get from there to running the Louisville CPB? It's not a direct career path in the traditional way, but you're building the skills every step along the way. I think there's a tremendous opportunity for the conference for two reasons. Number one, stylistically, we're onto something. Second, there's a lot more that we can be teaching. So I think what we're going to do this year is have three different learning tracks. one for marketing, one for visitor services or consumer engagement, and one for leadership, but deliver that training stylistically the same as other things have been.
Yeah, there's a real opportunity to bring in a whole new cohort of experts. And I think you're absolutely right about that.
And the other part of it too is it has to be self-sustaining. And one of the first conversations that I had with Sarah was like, okay, I understand that you did that. Do you realize you're worth more than that? It may be a harder sell to get somebody to pay you what you're worth, but when they buy and other people see it, that's the level that you're at.
One of the things I've always been fond of talking about is moving the consumer along the continuum of loyalty. I don't think the idea of how we continue to build loyalty and repeat business ever factored into the equation of what the content of the program should be. Just if somebody comes back, that's great. After the first couple of years, I pointed out how many people are coming back. Shouldn't we do something different to keep their loyalty from a content perspective?
There wasn't a very clear consumer or customer journey
Right.
that would engage them in other product or complementary product and
Yep.
service that would engage them in other things. And we
Yep.
have all the complementary good and service. We have, let's get you connected on one of these things, and now we'll connect you to the other stuff. That secondary spend, that average per client, all of that is through the roof. I had this conversation with Sarah. I said, Sarah, you're going to realize it takes just as much effort to sell a $600 product as it does a $60,000 product. So let's focus on the 60,000.
A mentor of mine once said, there's always room at the top. You just have to be able to find a way to provide that value and don't be ashamed of it.
I think that's where I see my role. I'm a problem solver and get shit out of your way so you can do what you need to do. The best day is when I say, oh, I've got such and such on my plate. And somebody in the call says, no, you don't. I'm like, oh, okay. That's a great day. Or, hey, I think I figured out how to do this. I'm like, great, let me know when it's done.
I completely agree.
It'll be interesting to see what happens with the conference over the next couple of years. I think we'll definitely see growth in attendance. I think we'll see growth in revenue. I think the sponsorship model is going to change a little bit. The traditional pricing model, that steep discount
Right.
way in advance, they're going to pay for it, whether you're charging them $5.95 or $8.95. They're going to pay for it either way.
And I think the other thing that's key, being as close to some of the conference programming that goes on in the industry
Bookend.
as I am, once people realize that this is different, educationally focused, you're going to come out here with real life basic skills that people will understand how different this is. I've had to occasionally explain to people who were only loosely familiar with the event, how is it different than a state tourism conference? How is it different than another industry association conference? And I've had to explain that. The more that point can be communicated and emphasized, hopefully, the more people will say that this is different.
The way I describe it is to say you can learn the skills anywhere. You can learn the skills anytime. You can go on YouTube and watch a video. The difference is building the comfort to actually apply it. And I tell folks the rooms are set up classroom style and you bring your laptop ready to work.
And that's something I've had to learn in my career, how much people value practical advice and education, but also the ability to engage with others in the room. That took me a while to get to that point, and I'm still learning it. The very first speaking and presentation opportunity I had as a consultant was at the South Carolina State Tourism Conference years ago. I was asked to give a presentation on a breakout topic. I thought, oh, I've got to go in and dazzle them. I've got to show them that I am the smartest guy in the room, justify my value. I remember distinctly all these eyes glazing over. I could just see it going way over their head. I've been trying to do better about that ever since and trying to, again, focus on what is real and practical, particularly for the audience you're catering to.
Early in my career, I did a lot of media training. A key component of that is being a concise speaker. Talk in sound bites, deliver practical messages that people can remember in 5 words or less.
The challenge for me was always, I've got 45 minutes on this stage. What am I going to do? Because I can run through all my material in 15.
Yeah.
And then, oh, wait, get everybody to learn from each other. Oh my
Yeah.
God, that's my time.
Yeah.
I got it. That was a brilliant aha moment. I'm like, oh,
It's,
save me from having to go through more slides.
I've had a hard time embracing that. I'll be the first to admit that. And some of it's because I've never met a 100 slide presentation I didn't like, but some of it is also just I need to realize who my audience is and how they learn and what they benefit from. It's taken me a while to get there, but I finally have gotten there. I have to continue to remind myself that what you think is simple as ABC can be rocket science to some people in the room.
Sometimes the room is not rocket scientists.
Exactly. And boy, I had to learn that the hard way, unfortunately.
Yeah. I think when you realize everybody comes from a different place, we trademark the term education with empathy. You have to speak to people on their level and where they're at. Sometimes that's giving them the chance to talk to each other. Instead of saying, here's a slide with your takeaways, talk to the 5 people around you and come up with your takeaways. It's self-discovery. That's where the learning, the instructional design and the educational psychology, that's where that comes into play. It doesn't come naturally to us that are experts in certain topics or fields, no matter how much we speak. That instructional component is not a natural trait.
No, it's not.
And it has to be taught and it has to be learned.
Yeah, it does. And like I said, sometimes the hard way.
Exactly.
I guess the only thing I wanted to ask you is, as you think about the content for programs going forward, who's the audience? Are there different segments? What
Yeah.
does your programming look like?
Sarah has not asked that directly. I know that we want to maintain space for the folks that have traditionally come, the folks on the smaller DMO side or the early career folks. And I think we need to leave space for that. Where I think we have the greatest opportunity for growth is in that mid-level. Companies like Miles and Coraggio and the Maddens, and they're very top heavy in their own contact lists. Yet there is a 10 to 15 year gap in the leadership pipeline that we're coming up against pretty soon. Getting those companies engaged for a sponsor value is dependent on providing the audience that is going to be the next leaders. On a revenue side, if those are going to be the next leaders, those are the folks we want to have be better educators.
Yeah.
Those are the folks we want to know. We want them to encourage their staff for the next generation coming to the conference and for growth in the conference. I think that's our sweet spot, is that mid-career, probably mid-sized DMO. Probably not the NYCM companies, but maybe Memphis and Nashville.
I talk a lot recently about the generational gap we are currently facing. Just here in North Carolina, we've had significant retirements of DMO leaders. And I just finished doing a strategic plan. One of the things that I heard, and it took me a while to understand, is that there was not enough being done to onboard new people at leadership positions and other positions coming into positions in DMOs in the state, either from within state
Yep.
or out of state.
Yeah.
And Visit and See was taking for granted that everyone knew already what they do. And in fact, we found there was a significant gap. We hadn't realized it, but there was a significant gap because all these new people had come in. I think the generational pivot shift is very real and does present some good opportunities.
Yeah. We went through one crisis after another crisis in that
Yeah.
last 20 years that scared people who are now mid-career. It scared them out of the industry.
Yeah.
The younger generation is recognizing tourism as an industry differently. Previously, it was, oh, I'm going to get a job in hospitality so I can work at a resort in the Caribbean. Not everybody's going to do that. Now they're recognizing tourism as a larger industry with more opportunity. It's that 35 to 50-year-old who's got some skill and some leadership skills to develop, and can influence the 20-something that's coming in.
Oftentimes, I found that we're increasingly in this world, it's not just within tourism, but we've become really good at building the careers of specialists and technicians, lost some of the ability to build those other skill sets needed for when you become the CEO, the man or the woman in these organizations. That's something I see at all levels. I have a friend, a talent development person. We were talking about the rise of remote work, about young people. And again, I know I sound like old man, get up on lawn. We were talking about what gets lost when you're essentially that person is really good technically in their home, but you lose the opportunity for watching how people engage with one another. You lose the opportunity to sit in your boss's office and see how he or she engages. You lose the opportunity to sit in a board meeting and understand what that's like. Even just the hallway conversations and how formative those experiences have been to our careers, some of that really gets lost.
And I think that's a generational shift, because having a fully remote team, that there are ways to do that if you are invested in being that kind of an organization.
Right.
Now, at the same time, you're 20-something, you're able to work remote from anywhere, you get a van and go to Mexico for the winter. You're never going to get those people back. If it's a leadership role in a static building or a non-transformational organization, that's going to be a challenging role to fill in a few years, because they have to have all the social skills that the person who's working remote is developing with their friend group, and they're developing with people outside of work. They have to have that with the polish that comes with being on display in a glass box in an office.
I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm not opposed to remote work. I get it. It's really about how do we also make sure that some of these other skill sets are being developed.
I'm the first one to say you're probably never going to get me in a necktie again.
No,
I don't even own one anymore. What clothes I have fit in the van. So,
well,
but I don't have a sport coat anymore. I'm like, why bother? It's just not going to happen. Industry has to adapt to that. One of my favorite quotes about that came from Walter Cronkite. One of those classic newscasters started working. Maybe it was Barbara Walters or something like that. But anyway, they went on site for some news report. Came back. Walter Cronkite looked at them and said, "Next time you go, dress for where you are." And we're in an industry where people are casual. It's one thing if you're working at the Ritz-Carlton yacht collection. Okay, I get that. Dress for that. But I'm here and I can smell horse shit. I'm not wearing my good shoes. I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me. Is it okay if I edit some of this down and make a podcast episode?
Absolutely.
Anything else you want to ask me?
I look forward to continuing the conversation. This has been very valuable. I look forward to getting to know you better and seeing the continued growth of your company. This is a tremendous asset for an industry that badly needs it.
We had almost 30,000 enrollments last year. We are on target to hit 70 or 80,000 enrollments before the end of this year. If you had asked me 5 years ago if that was going to happen, never. If you had sat down with me 25 years ago, I would never be running a nonprofit. If that was recorded or half of that was on film or Instagram, I'd probably be locked up in an institution by now. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Safe travels and have fun roaming around the Midwest.
I'll do my best. I'll have some Buckeyes and whoopie pies.
You got to introduce your niece to the food as much as anything.
I went to the donut shop in town and I got a dozen donuts, because who can walk into a donut place and not buy a dozen? So I come back to the van and I'm sitting there looking at this giant box of donuts and I'm thinking to myself, I'm not going to eat all these. Or if I am, I shouldn't. So I opened the door and this couple was getting out of their RV next to me and I said, "Oh, would you like some donuts?" And the wife looks at me, she goes, "No, thanks, I've got diabetes." And I said, I will too soon.
Thanks for tuning in to Business Class. This episode was brought to you by Learn Tourism, the nonprofit academy where we advance the tourism industry with cutting-edge training and sustainable practices. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to visit learntourism.org to learn more about our programs and how you can get involved. Until next time, stay curious, continue learning and making a difference through tourism.